So here's how I describe EMDR to people when they're wanting to know. When we go through a trauma, whether it be a big trauma or a little trauma, so big T trauma is what we say in EMDR. Big T trauma would be maybe natural disaster or abuse or violence. Go through that, or when we go through a little t trauma can be something as simple as a negative word spoken in your life. When we go through a trauma, sometimes what can happen is our brain doesn't store it effectively in our long-term memory. It stores it maybe in our short-term memory, maybe even in our subconscious. And then we often develop belief systems around the trauma. Sometimes they can be shame-based. I'm not enough, I'm unworthy, I'm a failure, I'm inadequate, or they can be fear-based. I'm going to get hurt, I'm going to die. And so then what happens is that in life, a lot of times what we're doing is we're looking at things through the lens of our trauma, even if we're not aware that it's there. So what EMDR can do is it can help by assisting the brain with reprocessing the trauma. Sometimes people think of it as though one or the other side of the brain wasn't able to process the trauma fully. So either the logical or emotional side of the brain. And so EMDR does what we call bilateral stimulation, stimulates both sides of the brain to reprocess the trauma. And we do that by doing eye movement, where our clients move their eyes back and forth. And so it might look something like this. And that stimulates both sides of the brain to reprocess the trauma. And hopefully, what it does is help the distress levels come down. So instead of it being at a 10, like, it comes down and it might be like, huh, that happened. And so it doesn't get rid of the memory altogether, but what it does is it helps us store it more effectively. So then we're not in that trauma response so much. We don't have quite the distress response when trauma comes up in our memory or things happen, right? Because when it's still stored in effectively, things bump up against that trauma and we get triggered to engage in our trauma response, whether that's anxiety, whether that's your fight, flight, or freeze, whether that's shut down, whether that's ruminating thoughts, however you tend to respond to triggers happening in your life that are bumping up against that trauma. I really love it. It's an effective therapy. It's not a magic wand. There's not something right now that I have found and that the industry has found that's a fix all, right? So it's not a magic wand, but it can be really effective. And I love having been able to work with it for so many years with my clients with really good success.